Good afternoon. We have portfolio questions. Justice and Law Officers. Question number 1, Linda Fabiani.
To ask the Scottish Government how complaints made by serving police personnel against their police forces prior to the formation of Police Scotland are being dealt with.
Ken McCaskill.
Complaints made by serving police personnel against the police force prior to the formation of Police Scotland are now a matter for Police Scotland or the Scottish Police Authority for senior police officers. Police personnel who feel they have been treated unfairly can raise their concerns formally through grievance procedures and can seek advice from their staff association or trade union.
Question number 2. Sorry, Linda Fabiani.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Almost a year ago, I wrote to the Scottish Police Authority on behalf of a serving police officer who is one of my constituents about a complaint not having had a response. A year down the line, we are no further on in that case. Can I say to the Cabinet Secretary that police officers have rights too, just like the rest of us? And it causes stress and it causes strain to people and their families with this uncertainty hanging over them. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary to deal with the Scottish Police Authority, have a chat with them about complaints generally and try and find out whether this is in fact a normal state of affairs and work out how to move this particular case on, but also how to give serving police officers a better deal when they make complaints to their own authority?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I take on board the points that Linda Fabiani makes. These clearly are of great significance to the officer and to his family. It affects their record and can have financial consequences. These are matters fundamentally for Police Scotland or the SPA if a complaint leads to a formal grievance being raised. And we do and would expect as a government, I think as a chamber, when we passed the legislation, that these matters would be dealt with in good time. Obviously, in terms of the legislation, I am constrained as to what I can do, but I can advise a member. I do meet with the Chief and indeed the Chair of the Authority on a regular basis. I did just meet with the Chief yesterday, but I am happy to undertake to the member to raise this particular issue about timescales. Clearly, these are matters that would normally be raised by the Federation or by the Police Superintendents Association, but I am happy to undertake to the member to put it on the agenda for discussions with Police Scotland and the SPA. It will be for them to decide and for them to act. But I do think it is appropriate that Parliament would expect these matters to be dealt with as expeditiously as possible.
Question number 2, Jackie Bailey.
To ask the Scottish Government what measures Police Scotland is taking to ensure that women face no barriers in joining and staying in the police force.
Cabinet Secretary.
The recruitment, selection and promotion processes for police officers and police staff are a matter for Police Scotland and the Scottish Police Authority. Police Scotland set out in its recently published corporate strategy plans to diversify its workforce through promotion of attractive, inclusive and responsible practices, including exploring alternative flexible recruitment options to build a more diverse workforce. Police Scotland have not published statistics for the first year of the new service, but figures from 2013 show that 27.5% of police officers were female, compared to 18.7% in 2003. And I note that in the recent superintendent promotion process, 69% of female applicants were successful, compared to 55% of their male colleagues.
Jackie Bailey.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response, but obviously comparing percentages doesn't actually tell us the figure of the number that applied. He will be aware of fears expressed by a senior police officer in the Scotsman, backed by the Scottish Women's Development Forum, that suggests that Police Scotland are in danger of creating a culture where women are discouraged from going for promoted posts. And although the number of promoted posts have increased, and I do welcome that, when you consider the rank of superintendent and above, the average is 12% of posts are occupied by women. What action can the Cabinet Secretary encourage Police Scotland to take to improve matters for women?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I am happy to encourage Police Scotland and indeed the Scottish Police Authority to do more. I don't think that I need to do much because I think I am pushing at an open door and they represent and recognise that. It was a privilege during my tenure of office to have been responsible for the appointment of accepted the appointment of Norma Graham as the first female Chief Constable, and to have that followed by Justine Curran as the Chief Constable in Tayside. I think it's recognised both by Vic Emery and indeed by Sir Stephen House that more needs to be done. But we do see progress not only with DCC Fitzpatrick but indeed with other senior officers coming through. We have come a long way. And I think when we're getting close to 30% of police officers being female, that is something we should welcome. There must and can never be a glass ceiling, and I think that is recognised by Police Scotland and the SPA. And I'm happy to give an undertaking, as I did to Linda Fabiani, to raise this with Vic Emery and with Sir Stephen House to ensure that more that can be done will be done.
Question number 3, in the name of John Finney, has not been lodged. The member has provided an explanation. Question number 4, Annabel Goldie.
To ask the Scottish Government what steps it is taking to address the reported criticism of the Criminal Justice Scotland Bill.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government remains firmly committed to all aspects of the Criminal Justice Bill, including our proposals to abolish the requirement for corroboration, which, as I've said time and time again, is a barrier to justice for too many victims of crime which are committed behind closed doors, such as rape and domestic abuse. When we announced the creation of Lord Bonamy's review group in February, there were calls, including from the Law Society and the Faculty of Advocates, for us to remove the corroboration reform from the bill and to bring forward a separate bill later in the session once Lord Bonamy had reported. That was not acceptable, as it's one of the key reforms in the bill and it's vital to improving the criminal justice system for vulnerable victims. However, we've also made clear our willingness to listen to constructive proposals in relation to this key legislation. That's why we gave careful consideration to, and in the spirit of cooperation have accepted, the suggestion from opposition members that Stage 2 should commence after Lord Bonamy's review has been completed. As the majority of the bill's provisions were already due for implementation in 2015-2016, today's move will have minimal impact on the overall timetable for this legislation, while allowing detailed and full scrutiny of the bill in its entirety and enabling any changes agreed in light of Lord Bonamy's recommendations to be included. Most importantly, I now hope it will allow the whole Parliament to get behind the progressive reforms in the bill, including the modernisation of police powers, enhancement of the rights of people in police custody and removal of the corroboration requirement.
Annabel Goldie.
Presiding Officer, I don't know whether it's the spring sunshine, the Easter reset or my question, but this is certainly a very welcome change of position by the Scottish Government, which is the right decision to allow more opportunity for informed opinion to be extended on the provisions of the bill. And I thank the Cabinet Secretary for reflecting a degree of political courage in making that decision and adopting that change of position. Can I tempt him further, Presiding Officer, down the path of righteousness? The Scottish Government is to amend the bill at Stage 2 to address the nonsense of automatic early release. We've waited 7 years for this, but better late than never. However, the proposed changes will affect a minuscule proportion of prisoners, 2%. Now, this isn't change, this is glacial progress. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, in manifestation of the benevolent mood in which he appears to be at the moment, to consider extending the abolition of automatic early release to a broader range of prisoners than just 2%?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I first of all thank Annabel Goldie for her kind comments and say that I'm grateful for the suggestion that came from her and indeed other political parties regarding the innovative procedure that we are using, but I very much welcome it. With regard to the specific action matter relating to automatic early release, we do require to have primary legislation to make the necessary changes. We will consider as an administration whether that should be delayed or can be dealt with within other legislation that is ongoing. With regard to the principal aspects of it, we do believe that this will deal with the most serious offenders, those who are given sentences that reflect the concern of the courts, and taking on board the concerns that we have with sexual offences, having it at a significantly lower level to ensure the protection of the public. But I'm happy, given the spirit of generosity that Ms Goldie asked her question, to reflect upon her points as we consider the best method of proceeding to make sure that we do make long overdue changes to automatic unconditional early release.
Given the statement that the Cabinet Secretary has made, and given the importance that I attach to such important statements being made first to the Parliament, what I intend to do is I intend to call a supplementary from each of the political parties and allow the sufficient time for that. Alison McInnes.
Thank you very much.
Point of order.
Given the significance of what the Cabinet Secretary said, would it not have been more relevant that he came and made a statement to Parliament?
Can I just say to Mr Findlay that is precisely what the Cabinet Secretary has done. It is precisely what the Cabinet Secretary has done. It is one of the methods in which we encourage the Scottish Government to make announcements to the Parliament. The point I was making is that I appreciate the fact that such an important statement has been made to the Parliament, and I fully intend, as I said, to make sure that all of the political parties have an opportunity to ask a supplementary of the Cabinet Secretary. Alison McInnes.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and thanks to the Cabinet Secretary for responding so positively to the suggestion from the opposition business managers that this would be a sensible way to legislate. It's a very important part of our criminal justice system. The Stage 1 debate was, to be fair, a low point for this whole Parliament, because it demonstrated that we had lost sight of how we should legislate. The appointment of Lord Bonamy's review panel meant that the Cabinet Secretary knew legislation as drafted was deficient, and yet at that point he was unable to say that we ought to stop and take stock. So I'm very grateful that the Cabinet Secretary recognises now that what we need to do is wait for Lord Bonamy to report and then for us to consider in detail all of the matters in the round. Thank you.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful for the suggestion and welcoming input from Alison McInnes. We were always going to wait for Lord Bonamy's review, but I think this is, as I say, a welcome and innovative procedure, and I put on record my thanks to Alison McInnes, as I did to Annabel Goldie.
Elaine Murray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I also express my pleasure that the Cabinet Secretary has listened to the opposition. Sometimes we don't expect the government to do that, but in this case the government has done so. It would have been inappropriate to pass legislation without seeing how it was to be amended, and I'm very pleased that this is the case, that we are not going to be expected to do this now. I just wonder, Cabinet Secretary, if you can give us a little further information about, first of all, the timescale you expect Lord Bonamy to report to you in, and therefore the timescale for the commencement of Stage 2.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I would first of all put on record my gratitude to Lord Bonamy, and indeed welcome his actions in extending the membership of the review group. I'll be seeking a meeting with Lord Bonamy just to update him on matters in due course. I understand that the first meeting of the group has in fact taken place. We anticipate that Lord Bonamy will be reporting sometime in or about April of next year. I think that is a timetable that he thinks is perfectly deliverable from previous discussions, and that, as I say, is a matter that we will factor in with the Bureau and your representatives there.
Margaret Mitchell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I very much welcome the announcement that Stage 2 is to be postponed. Cabinet Secretary, it does take cognizance of the very real concerns throughout Scotland, and that isn't stating it too widely, about the proposal to abolish. However, I fear that I consider there is nothing for the government now to fear in including the consideration of whether to abolish or not corroboration within Lord Bonamy's review. In fact, I consider it crucial that that's now done, and I'd very much appreciate it if the Cabinet Secretary could confirm that he is willing to include that in the Bonamy remit.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I welcomed Annabel Goldie's comments, I have to say, and I'm grateful that the Tories, as indeed with Labour and Liberal Democrats, came up with this proposal that we are happy to accept as a government. What I have to put on record is that there will be no change to the remit for Lord Bonamy's review. That has been met with him, discussed, it's been signed up to by him and all those who will be serving with him on that committee. As far as this government is concerned, and indeed as far as this Parliament was clear at stage one, the case against corroboration has been made. It is failing victims throughout Scotland. It has to go, and as I say, on that basis, we are prepared to allow greater scrutiny, clearer matters for Parliament to deal with matters, but the principle of addressing the removal of corroboration remains made.
Question 5, Adam Ingram.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how much it has invested or committed to activities for children and young people in the Carrick, Cumnock and Doon Valley constituency under the Cashback for Communities programme. Cabinet Secretary.
We published the breakdown of annual cashback expenditure by local authority area, and a total of £661,276 and £787,842 has been spent on projects in South and East Ayrshire respectively, which spans the member's constituency between 08-09 and 12-13. We will be publishing figures for financial year 2013-14 once these have been validated. As we approach Scotland's Commonwealth Games this summer, we are also currently considering an application for up to £300,000 of cashback funding for a state-of-the-art multi-use 3G sports facility to be built for Cumnock Juniors and Cumnock Rugby Football Club.
Adam Ingram.
Well, I very much welcome that announcement by the Cabinet Secretary. I'd also be grateful if you could send me a list of all the awards in my constituency and an outcome analysis, if any. And can I ask what plans he has to develop the programme further?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I announced last year that we will be extending and enhancing the Cashback for Community scheme to invest a further £24 million of criminals' money over the next 3 years to deliver this Government manifesto commitment to continue to expand our hugely successful Cashback programme. I had the pleasure of recently announcing the next tranche of £2.25 million cashback funding for the SFA at Shawlands Academy, and I'll be making a raft of further announcements to herald cashback funding for other individual sporting, cultural, employability and youth work projects over the coming weeks and months. And I thank the member for his interest in the cashback scheme, and I'll ensure he is provided with a list of cashback awards in the Carrick, Cumnock and Doon Valley area. They are many and multifold, and therefore it would be, I think, taking up too much time to go through them in precise detail.
Question 6, Mary Scanlon.
To ask the Scottish Government how the Trunk Road Patrol Group has performed since it was established.
Cabinet Secretary.
The creation of the Trunk Roads Patrol Group is just one example of the benefits of a single service, with specialist resources now being deployed across Scotland wherever and wherever they are needed. The Scottish Government welcomes the creation of the Trunk Roads Patrol Group, and in particular the addition of a base in Fort William. The new unit has already contributed to the improvement of response times to incidents in the west of Scotland. Tackling road safety and road crime is a key priority for Police Scotland, and this is reflected in the annual police plan. The Scottish Government does not monitor the performance of the Trunk Roads Patrol Group. Any assessment of the performance of specialist teams' resources is an operational matter for Police Scotland.
Mary Scanlon.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response, and would always welcome any bases in the Highlands. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary if he could confirm that the Trunk Road policing is sufficiently resourced in all divisions, particularly Northern? And will he also confirm whether targets were set with regard to the number of penalty notices issued for driving offences, both in the first year and indeed for future years?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, these are fundamentally matters for the Chief Constable, but from my knowledge of discussions with him, first of all, I can say that no targets, as far as I'm aware, have been set, and that's a matter that's been discussed both on this particular issue and indeed on others. With regard to operating across the north of Scotland, what I can say is from my engagement with the police, the breakdown and the ending of artificial barriers that existed in constabularies that were set up, as I say, in a manner that didn't necessarily have any geographical logic, are now better dealt with by Police Scotland, where trunk road patrolling can go wherever is necessary and not be dictated by the fact that they're moving out of, for example, Northern into Perth and formerly Tayside. So I think there is a huge improvement, and I'm glad she welcomes the establishment of the unit in Fort William.
Question 7, Siobhan McMahon.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it considers that the offensive behaviour at Football and Threatening Communications Scotland Act 2012 criminalises football supporters.
Cabinet Secretary.
No, the Scottish Government doesn't consider that the offensive behaviour at Football and Threatening Communications Scotland Act 2012 criminalises football supporters. The Act is intended to tackle sectarian and other offensive behaviour which has tarnished the image of football in Scotland. The Act is clear. Don't indulge in behaviour that's likely to incite public disorder and expresses hatred towards others when attending or travelling to or from a regulated football match. And indeed, a poll carried out by Panel Base in mid-October 2013 showed that 69% of respondents expressed support for anti-sectarian football legislation.
Siobhan McMahon.
As the Cabinet Secretary is aware, there has been severe criticism from fans groups regarding police tactics and how this legislation has been implemented. Indeed, football fans protesting against this Act at the Cabinet Secretary's recent party conference, where I understand issued with a Section 12 order by Police Scotland shortly after they'd stepped off the bus. Is the Cabinet Secretary aware of that, and what steps has he taken to address that? And given that a majority of football fans, along with a number of defence lawyers and sheriffs, believe that this legislation is ineffective and unpopular, does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that it is now time to actually act?
Cabinet Secretary.
No, I don't. As I say, I think there's overwhelming public support for it. We've committed to review it, and that is underway. I think it has been welcomed by all right-minded people the length and breadth of the country. What was perceived as a bit of banter is actually quite offensive and threatening in many instances. Scotland and Scottish football is a better place for the actions being taken by police and law enforcement.
We now move to portfolio questions on rural affairs and the environment. I'll just allow a few seconds for the front bench to change their seats. That's you, Cabinet Secretary. Okay, question number 1, Colin Keir.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what recent discussions it has had with the EU Commissioner for Agriculture and Rural Development regarding Scotland's additional coupled support entitlement.
Cabinet Secretary Richard Lock.
The Commission informed me in early April that it was not possible to use the UK-wide flexibility on coupled support to enable Scotland to go beyond the 8% limit, reversing the position taken by Commissioner Challis when I met him back in February, along with the UK Minister. I discussed this apparent U-turn with the Commissioner again on the 10th of April, and my officials subsequently met with Commission officials on the 16th. I am pleased to say that following this intervention, the Commission is now engaging constructively with us to try and see if there is a workable solution, and hope that this can be resolved very quickly. However, any solution, of course, has to be agreed with the UK Government, and I hope to have their full support on this issue, given that they offered this concession when they rejected our legitimate calls for the full convergence money that was available to the UK recently.
Colin Keir.
Thank you to the Cabinet Secretary for his reply. Would he agree that thanks to the UK Government we are being denied the full €223 million Pillar 1 convergence uplift, the extra coupling support, and of course we're being denied the red meat levy for livestock killed south of the border? Is it not time for Scotland to have a seat at the top table in Europe as an independent nation before the next CAP negotiations in 2017 to ensure we have never been shortchanged again?
Secretary.
Well, the member makes a fair point. It's only because the others are representing us in Europe and negotiating on our behalf that we have some really tough decisions to take, given our small budgets. Indeed, we are now bottom of the funding league within Europe for both Pillar 1, that's direct support for agriculture, and Pillar 2, that's rural development funding. And there is no way whatsoever that as an independent member state we'd be bottom of the funding league in Europe. So that's a harsh lesson which Scotland's had to learn over the last year or two, which certainly vindicates the case for a yes vote in September. However, we do have some tough decisions to take, and we shall take them in the coming weeks as far as we can with the limited resources available for the benefit of Scottish agriculture.
Alex Ferguson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. If I may, I'll be innovative and ask a supplementary that actually relates to the tabled question. The NFUS President recently held talks with Commissioner Chialos, at which he pressed the case for further couple payments to be directed towards the sheep sector. This appears to have been sympathetically received, yet when I asked the Cabinet Secretary about that recently in committee, he seemed to indicate that it would be extremely difficult to achieve that end. Could he now clarify his position on how he will use any extra coupling that is negotiated?
Cabinet.
Well, as the member knows, what we have said is that we are limited to 8% of our national budget being used for couple support schemes. We'd use all of that 8% as laid out in the consultation for the beef sector in Scotland. If we are able to secure flexibility beyond 8%, then clearly we will have the option of considering a sheep scheme as well as a beef scheme. And we will discuss that with stakeholders, as we are doing at this very point in time. And indeed, of course, we also have to have a plan B in case we do not achieve the extra flexibility beyond 8%. And I should tell the Chamber, I've actually just left a meeting with Owen Paterson, the UK Secretary of State for Agriculture, and I made the point to him that we need the UK Government support if indeed there is a solution offered by the Commission to use a UK scheme to help deliver extra flexibility for Scotland, not a Scottish scheme, which apparently is not allowed under regionalisation of the cap, then we need the UK Government support to make that happen. And we await that, and I've asked him to get back to me within a matter of days to give us the confidence that if we do find a solution with Europe, we can use it.
Question 2, Claudia Beam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government if it intends to revise the annual greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets set out in the Climate Change Act.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
Scottish Government remains committed to the interim target of a 42% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2020 and the target of an 80% reduction by 2050 as set out by the Climate Change Scotland Act 2009. However, the Scottish Government agrees with the advice of our independent advisers, the Committee on Climate Change, that revisions to the methodology for estimating emissions, which has added more than 2 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent to Scotland's emissions in almost every year from 1990 onwards, will continue to make achievement of fixed annual targets set through secondary legislation more difficult. The Committee advises there are two basic options for addressing this: to adjust the statutory annual targets to allow for the inventory revision, or find additional opportunities to reduce emissions that go beyond current and proposed policies. The Scottish Government will closely examine both options identified to address the challenge that revisions to the methodology has created.
Claudia Beam.
I thank the Minister for that clear answer. And does the Minister agree with me that if there are more policies and actions rather than proposals coming through from the next RPP, from this RPP and the next one, then it is still possible to hit the remaining annual targets? Not a simple question, I appreciate, in the Chamber, and could the Minister also provide details of any interdepartmental discussions in recent months about transformational change and conflicting policies, and also about low-carbon investment?
Minister.
There is a complex question, but I'll try and answer it best I can. On the first point about the issue to do with the approach that we are taking, we are looking, obviously, to try and ensure that we convert as many proposals to policies in the RPP2. The legislation in the Climate Change Scotland Act sets out the requirement for the government to produce proposals and policies, and obviously it's our intention to convert proposals into policies over time. But I take the point that obviously we are always looking for opportunities to strengthen our action where we can do so, and I assure the member that is something that's constantly in the front of my mind. In terms of interdepartmental discussions, yes, I can confirm there are discussions ongoing about issues such as sustainable active travel with Keith Brown and colleagues, but also looking with colleagues in housing and other departments through both the delivery board, which happens at Scottish Government level with the rest of the public sector, and also in the Public Sector Climate Leaders Forum, in which Ms Beamish participates as an observer on behalf of the committee. So I can assure that we are looking at that and indeed looking to strengthen our low carbon action wherever we can.
Before I move to question number 3, can I just say to members that I really do want to make progress through this set of portfolio questions, so I'd appreciate very much if the questions and the answers were as brief as possible. Question 3, Margaret McCulloch.
To ask the Scottish Government how it promotes scientific research and innovation in agriculture.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. To stick to the first paragraph of my answer, I'll just say that the Scottish Government provides an annual investment of around £30 million for agricultural scientific research and innovation delivered through our world-leading research institutes, universities and government divisions and agencies.
Now, Ms McCulloch, the Cabinet Secretary listens, so let's make this brief too.
I will try my best, Presiding Officer, but I can't promise. The White Paper suggests that if there were a yes vote this September, then scientists and researchers based here in Scotland would continue to benefit from UK research spending. It doesn't explain how. It doesn't explain why the rest of the UK would continue subsidising Scotland, and it doesn't set out any contingencies if the Scottish Government don't get their way. Isn't it clear that only with devolution can guarantee Scotland the best of both worlds, the power to grow our agriculture sector without putting UK research funding at risk?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I first of all start by correcting the member and say that when Scotland votes yes, that we will pursue the solution of a common research area, given that at the moment, of course, research contracts in Scotland are won in merit, both in the rest of the UK and indeed Europe as well, where an increasing rate of research grants are coming from for our fantastic research institutions in Scotland. And indeed, if Scotland remains part of the UK and the UK were to leave Europe, then our research institutes would potentially lose these European research contracts, which would be bad news indeed, and I would argue that's the biggest threat to our research institutions in this country. However, even with devolved issues, we of course have common research projects across these islands, even where issues are devolved, and I have no doubt whatsoever that will continue under independence as well.
Supplementary from Nigel Dawn.
Presiding Officer, and I shall try and make it a supplementary to the previous 3 questions in one, because I'm wondering whether the Cabinet
But we need it brief, Mr Dawn.
Whether the Cabinet Secretary can tell me a little bit more about the Green Cow project, which I think is looking to ways of improving how we reduce the amount of methane that we get from our livestock.
Well, very briefly, I can just say that the Green Cow project is an excellent project which I was involved in launching in March 2011, and of course the idea behind that is to reduce the carbon footprint of livestock production, particularly the beef sector, in this country, although already our environmental footprint from cattle farming is a lot less than in other countries. However, we of course have to continue to research how we can reduce our carbon footprint even further, and that is a great facility. It's world leading, and I'm sure it will pay dividends for Scotland's green and clean image for food production in the future.
Question 4, Murdo Fraser.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what assistance it is providing to farmers adversely affected by severe flooding.
Minister.
I'll stick to the first paragraph, Presiding Officer. With Scottish Government and SEPA officials, I recently met the President of NFUS to discuss a number of issues around flood risk management. In addition to hearing how a number of individual farm businesses were affected by the severe weather, I also heard about the practical benefits that changes to SEPA's river engineering regulations, regulatory controls last year have made to allowing farmers to undertake appropriate repairs to their properties.
Murdo Fraser.
Thank the Minister for his response. It doesn't sound like there's a lot of practical assistance being offered there. I would just remind the Minister that in response to severe flooding incidents south of the border, the Westminster Government has established a farming recovery fund with grants of up to £35,000 per affected farmer. Will the Scottish Government consider doing something similar?
Minister.
Well, I obviously kept the first answer brief, Presiding Officer. One of the reasons why was that we are offering a number of measures in which we are helping farmers on a very practical basis to understand what existing measures already exist in Scotland. We updated our procedures last year, in fact, before the recent flooding events, to make it easier for farmers to address dredging issues and river management issues. But also we gave practical support and advice to NFUS delegates attending that meeting as the measures they could help to, particularly to impact positively on farms that have been affected in Dumfries and Galloway and in Ayrshire recently. But I'm happy to provide further information about what we said to NFUS at that meeting.
Question 5, Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what steps it will take to mitigate the impact on Orkney of the move from a historic to an area basis for payments under the reformed CAP.
Cabinet Secretary.
The CAP reform represents a significant change as we move from historic to area-based payments, and inevitably the changes will affect our agricultural sector in different ways. I am aware of the concerns expressed by some areas, and I know that my officials have been working closely with local farmers in Orkney to help them understand more fully the potential impact of CAP reform in the member's constituency. And of course I look forward to meeting representatives from his local constituency in the coming days.
Liam MacArthur.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response, for the help from his officials and indeed for the offer of the meeting later this month. As he says, the move to area-based payments looks likely to trigger a reduction in economic activity on Orkney farms. This will have a serious knock-on effect for the wider economy, not just agricultural supply sectors, vet services, construction businesses, but also local shops, schools and possibly transport links. So could I ask the Cabinet Secretary what measures he thinks may be able to be put in place to ensure that support is targeted towards active island farmers, including those not currently eligible for support?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. On my visits to Orkney, you can't help but notice, of course, how livestock production in particular plays such an important part in the local economy, and the beef sector, of course, on Orkney is renowned. And for that reason, I am taking very seriously the concerns expressed by Mr MacArthur's constituents. I'm paying very close attention to this issue. Of course, some of the initial projections do suggest there are potential increases for some of the islands. However, it is a complex situation, and that's why I'm very, very keen to meet local representatives to hear directly their concerns and their ideas.
Question 6, Willie Coffin.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government how it supports the food and drink industries in Kilmarnock and Dervin Valley.
Cabinet Secretary.
The Scottish Government recognises that Scotland's food and drink businesses, both large and small, are a key part of the economy, and the Government is doing all we can to support this effort to make sure they continue to make that contribution. And I believe that our food policy is hopefully benefiting Ayrshire, which is already making a significant contribution, as well as many other parts of the country.
Willie Coffey.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. He will be aware, of course, of local companies like the 5-star rated Cook School, the award-winning Dunlop Cheese, Varani's ice cream maker, who's been in Kilmarnock since the 1930s, and more recently the awards won by Brownings the Bakers in relation to their world-famous Kelly pies. Would the Cabinet Secretary agree to visit my constituency in the near future to meet with local food producers and to taste for himself the fine products making a great contribution to Scotland's larder?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. I'll go anywhere for a Kelly pie, so I'll happily get my office to contact the member as soon as possible to set up a visit. I have to say I have had the privilege of visiting Braehead Foods in Kilmarnock a while back, which is a great growing business and is a sign of the fantastic food and drink credentials of the member's constituency. And of course that particular business is driven forward by Craig Stevenson, who's a big character and doing a great deal for the local economy. So yes, I'll be happy to visit that area.
We now know who ate all the pies. Question number 7, Jean Arcott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what the impact is on crofting of the reintroduction of sea eagles.
Paul Gilhan.
There's been no specific study into the impact of reintroduced sea eagles or white-tailed eagles on crofting, although the Scottish Government has funded 2 research exercises to examine the feeding patterns of sea eagles. We accept the sea eagles may sometimes take lambs, which may have a financial impact on crofters. However, the evidence from the research has been carried out in studies in Mull and Gaelic points to sea eagles taking very few lambs, and also that it's not always clear whether these lambs were alive and well, or sickly, or even dead at the time they were taken. SNH has run a sea eagle management scheme for a number of years. The scheme is operated in conjunction with the NFUS, the Scottish Crofting Federation and RSPB. The scheme is currently under review with a view to provide a better and more targeted support and practical advice to crofters and farmers. But it's also worth pointing out that sea eagles have a positive economic impact in crofting communities, and an independent study in 2011 concluded that resident sea eagles bring in £5 million to the Mull economy each year and support up to 110 jobs in the tourism sector.
I thank the Minister for his response. Thank you. At the last meeting of the Cross-Party Group on Crofting, we heard from Willie Fraser, a crofter from Gairloch, who loses an average of 20 lambs a year to sea eagles, with an obvious adverse impact on his livelihood. Does the Minister believe that the Scottish Crofting Federation's recent suggestion of following the Spanish example of leaving dead livestock out for predators could help to mitigate these losses?
Minister.
Well, I'm not familiar with the example from Spain. I'm happy to look at that, Presiding Officer, on behalf of the member. But what I am aware of is that in a number of cases involving raptors, that diversionary feeding tactics are used to try and limit the potential impact on livestock of a number of different species. So I'm happy to look at that issue and correspond with the member on it.
Question 8, Graham.
To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to calls to allow the docking of tails of working dogs.
Secretary.
We are currently considering the recently published research by Glasgow University. We need to gain a clear understanding of how this has altered the views of interested parties in Scotland before, of course, we take any decision about how to move forward. We have therefore invited the key veterinary, welfare and countryside organisations to offer their views on the research and whether it supports a change to legislation on tail docking by the 23rd of May.
Graham Day.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. As someone who represents a rural constituency, I very much welcome the Scottish Government's consultation on this issue. But I wonder whether the Cabinet Secretary agrees with me that as he seeks the views of interested parties, considered evidence-based input from the gamekeeping fraternity would be particularly welcome in light of their coalface understanding of the subject.
Minister.
Yes, I recently met the gamekeepers outside Parliament to collect a petition and to speak to them about their concerns over the tail talking legislation. And of course, I promised that I would consult them once the research was available, which it now is. And I certainly agree that evidence from the gamekeepers and others who regularly use working dogs, of course, is crucial to inform our consideration of this issue. We had ensured that the Scottish Gamekeepers Association, the Scottish Countryside Alliance, the British Association for Shooting and Conservation were all represented on the steering group for the Glasgow University Research Project, and we will listen closely to their views in the weeks ahead.
Okay, that ends portfolio questions. We move swiftly on to the next item of business. It's a debate on motion number 9747 in the name of Jackie Bailey on fuel poverty. Can members who wish to speak in the debate press request to speak by